Welcome back to Fast Politics, Josh Marshall.
Thanks for having me.
So happy to have you.
Thank you.
Things are going great. The
Yeah.
East Wing, home of Eleanor Roosevelt, now home of, he's basically Penn stationing the East Wing of the White House. Discuss.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually just wrote a post about this that I think, we had two things happen yesterday. We had that, or at least, where the pictures which showed the totality of it came out. And we also had this thing about how he's instructing his employees to cut him a check for $230 million. And I both of those are things that they're certainly not the worst things that have happened in the last 9 months.
Not. Yeah.
But they have an audacity and like a vulgarity. How do you escalate from like, yeah, the president had one of his cabinet secretaries write him a check for $230 million. I don't know where you go up from there. So, and both of those things, and then he demolished a third of the White House complex. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Like I didn't know that was going to happen. So he's
It's
just
amazing.
He's fully in the Twilight Zone Anthony phase of his presidency, where he's just doing like totally crazy shit and crazy shit that isn't even like key parts of the plan, just stuff he woke up one day and said, I want to build a ballroom.
Let's talk about that, because I actually think it's not the Project 2025 that's going to unravel this thing, if it does unravel. It's the photos of the destruction of the East Wing that are going to do it, because it's hard to explain. If you tried to legally destroy the East Wing of the White House, right? If you try, you wouldn't be able to get
you
the
have zoning
permits.
problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you couldn't get permits for what he did with the Rose Garden, let alone where he paved the Rose Garden to make it the Rose Garden Club, TM. But what he's doing to the ballroom, I just wonder, sometimes with Trump world, there are second order effects that sink the whole thing. You know what I mean? And I just wonder if those visuals, and then my favorite thing, the coup de grace, is that their Treasury Secretary employees stop sharing photos of the demolition of the East Wing. We know you can see it out your window. I'm sorry.
No,
it doesn't make it less true.
I actually think you are right. And I especially think you're right because I agree. And I just wrote something kind of to this effect, like literally just finished it a half hour before we started. As we said at the beginning, these are far from the worst things that have happened. In a way, they are almost trivial. Look, you can rebuild a building, you can replace it. They just basically cut a check for $40 billion to that Javier Milei guy down in Argentina because
they really like him.
They really like him, and a lot of Scott Bessent's like hedge fund friends like are taking a bath on their investments. So
terrible bets on Argentina.
So in a way, to your point, a lot of the Project 2025 stuff is very bad, but they are things that are hard for people who are not kind of drenched in politics to kind of put together the significance of why they're different, what they mean, all this kind of stuff. So I actually think what you're saying is very right. The other part of this is it is a truism now that we know he came in the second term without the semi-establishment people around him who held certain things in check. He came in with people who were 100% MAGA and wanted to do everything. That really changed the equation.
Yeah.
Yes, it led us to where we are now. But I think what we're starting to see, and it's really, again, it hit me in an epiphany yesterday with these two stories, but I think we've seen it over the last few weeks. He's in the stage now where once you've been living the impunity lifestyle for 10 months, other things start to occur to you. Things that are just so weird that even though you've got sycophants around you, they might not have occurred to you before that. And these are the things, people see that. No wonder they're telling the Treasury people not to share the photos. You see that and you say, what the actual fuck? He's tearing down the White House. How can that, people see that like something's wrong.
So this is a theory of the case that has been sort of floated by a friend of mine who's a fancy socialite. This is like the fall of the Roman Empire now. Like my man is drunk with power.
Mm-hmm.
He's 79 years old. He's the oldest person to ever be president. I know we're not allowed to talk about how old he is. but he is
Yeah.
very old.
Yeah.
And he has just decided, like, absolute power craves absolute whatever.
Yeah, no, these are, sort of different metaphors and different prisms for saying the same thing. He is, the Supreme Court lit this fire, or maybe, the American people or a minority of the American people lit this fire back in 2016. But it's the Supreme Court that really came with a couple jerry cans of gasoline and poured it on, and they did this and continue to do this. And at a certain point, you just start doing things like, I'm going to bring in a bulldozer and tear down the White House and create the sort of the Trump imperial palace. One thing that actually occurred to me, I don't know, everybody's kind of pointed to this little kind of meandering moment he had in the Oval Office yesterday where someone asked him about this. If you follow the actual course of the meanders, I think what is possible here is that he may want to take the $230 million, which then becomes his, and then he will pay for the ballroom. He gave the
But
people a new ballroom.
I was told corporate donors were going to
Yeah,
pay for the
yeah,
ballroom. But it does seem like you're
but
onto something
he
here.
actually, again, people go back and look,
Yeah.
find that video because he actually talks about, oh, I'll give it to charity and the ballroom and you know how his
Yeah.
mind works after a certain point. But yeah, you just wake up and start doing like completely crazy things and creating a private paramilitary slash secret police is another kind of bad thing. But that
Nah.
i- but that at least is something like we know why the whole team wants to do that. That is a sort
Right.
of a cornerstone part of the whole project. So you're
Yeah.
gonna take some hits to be able to do that because of all the positives in their mind for the sort of the conquest of the American Republic. But these things, and again, we're doing a bailout for $40 billion of Argentina, and we're going to let them do their own bailout by cutting all of our farmers out of the soybean business.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things you do if you just don't think there
Don't
are any
care.
limits, no one care, nothing bad. And at a certain level, you know, when you're 79, there are no limits.
Yeah.
What is he? Is he not going to get a good job after this term? I mean, why should he care?
One of the things that I've been on many television panel where we're talking about these the hats, he's going to run again, he's going to run
Yeah,
again, he's going to run
yeah,
again. I'm like, he's going to be 83. I mean, look, he has the greatest Aryan genes ever known to man.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
has the purest, healthiest, whitest, whatever.
yeah.
But, ultimately, you don't live forever, right? Unless we do, and I'm just missing something.
Most of us don't. But look, I don't think he's, look, my man Bob Dylan is out there touring at 84. He
Right.
does, tours nonstop. So people can live a long time and remain relatively spry. But look, I just don't think for a variety of reasons. I've never thought that is going to happen. He may think it's going to happen, but if he doesn't do that, he'll get Don Jr. or JD nominated, or maybe
Right.
we've seen, maybe Barron. I don't know, but the other brother could be Eric. He's moved into being primary son. In any case, what it all comes together is he is in a position kind of no one in the world has ever been in when you
Right.
combine American primacy with the total primacy and restraint from any law or any limit of corruption of the American presidency, and it's going to his head. It will
Yeah.
be those
It's
things that will
it's Roman
undo
Empire.
them. Yep, yep, yep.
So let's talk about Democrats. There's been a lot of drama about the Maine senatorial primary over the last 2 days on the internet. We have Graham Plattner, Janet Mills. We have some Graham Plattner tattoo stuff.
Yeah.
Graham Plattner comments, some pretty not what I think of when I think of the Democratic Party comments. We got Janet Mills is old. I mean, what do you think happens here?
I'm not really sure. One thing that I caught, or actually my colleague Kate Riga caught, is that she, I guess, said in that debate she wants to hold on to the filibuster. And for a lot of Democrats, rightly, I think that is disqualifying. So there's a lot of things about her that would be good. I mean, she's a popular two-term governor. You can't take anything away from that. She's old, but like, get the seat and then hand it off. Kind
Right,
of,
right, right.
we got to do what we can here. I don't really know with Plattner. This tattoo thing has just come up in the last. First you had the comments, then you had the tattoo, and I'm still trying to kind of catch up here. I'm curious to see what the next poll is. I don't think people. I think
Right.
Mainers thought he was a little wild. It's hard to give something like that up once you seem like you're the winning insurgent candidate to possibly go right to the U.S.
Right.
Senate. So I'm kind of reserving judgment till I
Right.
see what voters actually think.
And
And
there's some
I,
and there's something to be said for like let Maine be Maine. They know what they're doing. They'll pick who they
yeah,
want.
yeah. And I'm not someone who kind of falls hard for these kinds of candidates. I'm
Right.
very pragmatic about who seems like the best candidate, but these are strange times, and I don't think it is right to get significantly ahead of the public in Maine, both the
Right.
primary public and the general election public. And because a lot of these things, like if he has a Trey, kind of tattoo that white nationalists are crazy about, are the Republicans going to attack him? I mean, they're going to say he's reaching out to MAGA, right? He's trying to be bipartisan. So I don't know how this is going to
So
play out.
this gets to this question of like, how do you worry about problems in a party when the party is facing off against a guy who is basically Nero? How can you worry about anything when they're like, we don't want to have elections anymore? Democracy's failed.
Yeah, and there's a number of different levels to answer that on. I do think to a great extent, people are going to go into you're going to go into the ballot box in 2026 like you like this or you don't like it. It's a very binary choice. It's a certain kind of split ticket voting. If you don't like what's happening in the country, there's one way to signal that, and it's the non-Republican person. And I do think that is going to make a lot of these things less important than they normally would be. Obviously, you have to balance against that the stakes are pretty high. You don't want to make it any harder than it has to be. You had that thing, a few days ago where they had the text from the, New York Republicans or New York Young
You
Republicans. I
mean
can't
the
remember
first
which.
Nazi text chat, not the
Yes,
second one,
yes, yes.
which
And
was
and but and
later.
that kind of thing is sort of like, wow, they talk in private the way they talk on Twitter. I mean,
Right.
okay, like was that stunning? So it's
You know,
again on that
it
specific race, I really kind of reserve my judgment to see what the voters in Maine make of all this.
it's an interesting question though with that second Nazi group chat because
Yeah,
the admin actually pulled the nominee, which, as you know, has not happened so many times. This is an
yeah,
administration that managed to get RFK Jr.
yeah, yeah,
through. My
yeah.
man who basically believes that circumcision and Tylenol cause autism.
Yeah, for me, let's hope not. But yeah, I think there's some of these nominees that the people around Trump, or in some cases, maybe even Trump, sometimes, and some of these, like, I want this guy, Pete Hegseth. Clearly, Trump was like, I want this guy. I want this guy running the Pentagon. Some of these guys, I think, are more kind of like, let's see what happens. This will be, it's sort of like shooting off a firework. Let's just kind of see what happens. If it's a dud, that's cool. We'll find another one. I think that's kind of where they were with this Ingracia guy. I mean, on the other hand, I do think we have seen a number of things over the last few weeks. It's so much else is going on that it's gotten little attention. There was that thing where the Department of Education sent out that deal to, I think it was 9 universities. You want to kind of sign on to the MAGA agenda. I believe now all of them, even the more kind of
That's right. I think
right
University of
leaning ones.
Texas at Suck Up may still be in the game, but everybody
Okay.
else has said
But yeah,
no.
USC, and not that
Right.
USC is like a MAGA university, but of the
No.
of the ones that were sent it, they seemed like if anybody's going to sign on, it's going to be them, and they didn't. And there are other
And
there's
the
just
Pentagon reporters left. I mean,
yeah, there's
there are
there's just things
certainly,
happening where they maybe they're getting to some of the limits of their ability to impose things.
and more than 7 million people marched to say they don't fucking like this. And if you think
Yes.
about it, 7 million people for a minute, like, if each of those people and it may be more, it may be 8.5. If even those people represent 5 people, which it's a
Mhm.
pretty good bet they do,
Mhm.
right? Or
Mhm.
maybe more,
Yeah.
that's a pretty big part of the electorate that's fucking pissed.
No, that's true, and I think I was actually talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, that there's the numbers and the visuals that really hearten people and are a demonstration of numbers and power, and that's really important. But where protest movement and these kind of demonstrations actually have the most impact is usually that, you get everybody together, you organize your event in the local area, and then you head out to get a beer after the protest, and everybody says, "Hey, let's stay in touch for the next election. Let's canvass together." I think, one of the impacts of the whole No Kings thing is going to be, to the extent that that happens, going forward over the next year or so. Do you is does this become a coming together that ends up building organizational muscle that
Yeah.
accomplishes things going into the election next year?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a real question.
Yep.
Josh Marshall.
Thanks for having me.